Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Today, we will be wrapping up our war settings series, and we are going to be doing so by talking about adapting modern military tactics into your high fantasy war setting. Now, even with a high fantasy setting, even if you're not having magic be fairly commonplace, even if it's just to a state of being more uncommon, it still is a sensible and really cost effective measure for different leaders, kings, emperors, generals, whoever to employ in with their military forces. Really, when it comes right down to it, magic can do so much, and you can use so many different things to recreate different methods of warfare that we have created and make use of now in our modern day and age. So let's go ahead and just dive right into that a little bit. And we're going to start off by taking a look at, well, just the baseline rules for what it costs to outfit just a single knight, a single chivalrous armored figure mounted upon an armored warhorse. So, with a knight, you're taking a look at, well, to start off with, full plate armor. Full plate is probably going to be one of the biggest expenditures for the knight, coming in at a nice solid 1,500 gold pieces right off the bat there. That's a lot of cash to be having to throw around. Top it off, every knight's going to need a horse. Well, foot knights maybe not, but let's just stick with the current example. Well, with the knight, they're going to need a horse, and it's going to need to be a heavy horse. It's got to be large, powerful to be bearing this armored figure. I mean, solid suit of full plate weighs what, 60, maybe 80 pounds or so, made out of steel. And on top of that, you also have the chainmail beneath it, and then the gambeson beneath that, plus whatever padding may be underneath of that as well. And, say 180, 200 pound figure. That's almost another 300 pounds that the horse is having to carry, on top of the fact that the knight's going to have a lance, a sword, a shield, and the horse is going to have its own barding to have to worry about. It's a lot of weight. It's got to be a big, powerful animal. And to top it off, that animal has to be trained. So a trained warhorse in the Pathfinder rulebooks and also within the if I'm remembering correctly, in the 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons rule books, comes in at about 750 gold pieces. So already between the 1500 and 7500, we're at 2,250 gold pieces total. And we still aren't counting anything like a longsword and lance and falchion, warhammer, things like that. Which, those are all negligible enough, we won't worry about counting those, but it's about another 20-ish, maybe 30-ish gold pieces in on top of all of that. But we're also assuming that the knight only has one horse, and we're also only assuming the knight's going to have one lance. Chances are, especially if it's a well-off knight, part of a larger military force, they may have a couple of horses going along with them because, well, it's war. The horse may get shot out from under them, may take a spear to its chest. Any number of horrible, awful things that can happen to a person is going to happen to a beast of war. So the horse may end up getting shot, so the knight's going to need a replacement. So they may have 2 or 3 horses at their beck and call, ready to replace whatever the knight is currently riding. So, let's just call it a nice even 3 times 750. That's 1,450, 500. So it's 1,500 right there. So that's 2,250 plus the 1,500, 3,750 gold pieces just for a single night. And there's also other extraneous costs, other things like if you have knights, presumably you have some sort of a feudal system, so the knight has to have lands, stable hands, a keep, or if they're in service to a lord that they serve directly, like a duke or a baron or a viscount, they are going to be still have their own lands to put up their own stables, train their horses, and not only that, but the knight has to be trained basically from an incredibly young age, like about 10 or so, all the way up through adulthood to learn how to ride, fight with the lance, use the sword, use the mace, the warhammer, ride their horse properly, so many things. And then, of course, it's not counting in all the training that goes into these horses. There's a lot of expenditure there. There's a lot that goes into training up and fielding even a single knight. And then you're talking about a whole cavalry division of them, if it can be afforded anyways, and we are assuming that they can in this case. So we're already over the 3,000 gold piece mark for one knight, and then you think about what it's going to take to field, let's say 100 of these heavy armored knights. Even just 100 of them, you're over 30,000 gold pieces right there. That's a lot. That's a lot of money to have to shell out there. Now, let's compare that with a first level sorcerer. A first level sorcerer character, or even a first level wizard. You give that wizard just a single scroll of fireball. One scroll of fireball. Third level spell created by a 5th level caster. 750 gold pieces. And then you give them a wand of magic missile. We're not even really going over the 1,000 gold piece mark, or at least not very far. So for 1,000 gold pieces, we have outfitted and equipped a sorcerer with some equipment that can do a great deal of damage. Typically what you want to do with cavalry is you have your block formations of infantry engaged. Forget the movie nonsense. As much as I love movies about knights and old school warriors and the like from the late medieval settings, they very rarely portray it correctly. They didn't just slam into each other and have this big brawling melee. People would die by the scores like that, like they show in the movies, and that's stupid. That's a stupid way to fight. Instead, think more like what the Spartans did in the movie 300. That's quite a bit more accurate, and both armies would be doing that in these long shield formations, or if not shield formations, just blocks of infantry, because keeping your units together in these big masses makes them much harder to kill, break, and rout. So you have these lines of infantry just collide with one another, fighting back and forth over their shields, from behind their spears. It's much harder to deal with. So you have these lines of infantry going, and then you have your cavalry come around and either hit the flanks or drive right into the rear of the enemy formation and deal a great amount of damage that way. It's absolutely fantastic. Well, it's a fantastic tactic. Much as I enjoy medieval history and studying warfare and the like, the absolute cost of human lives is just staggering and horrible to think about. But point being, that's typically how you want to use cavalry against a block of infantry. You don't drive them right into it, because even if they don't have spears, once that charge loses its momentum, those cavalry are vulnerable if that infantry unit hasn't routed, or worse yet, if there are other infantry units supporting the unit that they just drove into. Then they can end up surrounded and torn down, beaten down, and killed, because it doesn't matter how badass you are. You have 30 people pulling you off of your horse, you're screwed. And cavalry want to hit the flanks, deal with other enemy cavalry. They have to be used in a specific fashion. But you have the sorcerer with essentially a grenade launcher with that scroll of fireball. They may only be able to use it once, but a block of infantry approaches, they fire that off. That's a 20-foot radius that fireball spell affects right in the middle of a block of infantry, and it's going to be dealing a minimum of 5d6 points of fire damage. So at worst, it's going to deal 5 points of damage. At most, it's going to deal 30. So we're looking at around roughly about 15 points of damage right there, with the potential for the targets to be set on fire as well. And it's right in the middle of that infantry formation if it's aimed properly. So that's going to do a lot to not only inflict casualties upon the enemy army, but it's also going to disrupt that formation. It's going to weaken that formation before they ever get contact with the enemy. And then using a wand of magic missile, they can just start plinking away and start hitting people, either picking off the injured or inflicting more damage as their allied infantry units advance on them. And then to top it off, the sorcerer or wizard also has their own spells in reserve on top of this equipment that they could very easily been provided. And you have a recipe for basically, well, a mobile human or humanoid version of a turret, basically. A turret with long range attack capabilities and the ability to deal a massive amount of damage. It may only be with one shot, but that one shot is still going to save so many lives for the general employing them. And then, you know, consider again that with this one sorcerer or wizard with a wand of magic missile and a basic a basic scroll of fireball can deal this much damage and is only about 1/3 the cost of a singular knight. You can have 3 of these going, and if you can afford to employ a bunch of knights, if the sorcerers or wizards are readily available, you can employ 10, 20 of these sorcerers and wizards and have them just wreak absolute mayhem and havoc on the enemy forces. And not only that, but the enemy forces could easily have these available as well, which gets us into these characters being prime targets for skirmishers and assassins. And not only that, but you'd want to use screens of skirmishers and assassins and the like, light scattered groups of infantry using more small unit tactics like what we use today with small squads going out and engaging different enemy units, trying to flank them, outmaneuver them. Support the cavalry, provide that all-important, just that all-important close-range infantry support to go out and find these specialized units and try to take them out before the larger groups, the larger columns, and the cavalry are possibly threatened by them. And, well, using rogues or even monk characters, if monks are available in the setting, the rogues and monks do absolute wonders for taking out low-level wizards and sorcerers, because they can't shoot at it if they don't know it's there and can't see it. So these characters make great skirmishers to help screen these specialized units out before the rest of the infantry show up. And that's another play off of the modern military unit tactics, using small units to go and engage the enemy rather than just immediately sending in the larger blocks of infantry. And we can even go further from there. We can take a look at different methods of reconnaissance, wizards using scrying spells or the like, or rather than employing wizards, using much more higher end magics than basic magic missiles. If they have these higher end wizards, may as well try to bring in some giant eagles and the like. Giant eagles get a, if I'm remembering correctly, a +15 to a bonus to their spot checks. And so you basically have this high flying, long range reconnaissance units that can just fly overhead, look down, and just spy on the enemy army. And if you're employing druids or, again, wizards, and you have ways to magically communicate or even see through the eyes of the eagle, you can scout out the enemy units, positions, and fortifications and pick up on quite a lot of things, even stuff that they may be trying to camouflage. Even if it's cleverly camouflaged, a +15 bonus to spot checks, that's huge. I mean, just with a roll of 15 on the die, you're looking at a total of a 30, even a 10, something right there smack dab in the middle. That's going to be a total of 25 using a giant eagle to scout units out. That's absolutely fantastic and something that should be readily made use of. And this is just an absolute small little snippet of the many, many different ways that you can make use of these modern day tactics and build them into a more fantasy setting. It's absolutely a lot of fun. And not only that, but if we reverse this, which again we can very easily do, if we bring in magic into a modern fantasy set or a modern setting, we can absolutely start flipping the script. I ran a D20 modern setting set in World War II, but magic is real, and all of these different monsters and creatures are real. I think I talked about this setting a little bit before, but suffice it to say, at the Point du Hoc, when the Rangers scaled up the cliffs there, started taking out the anti-aircraft batteries and drove off the German units, had an SS colonel show up, magic user, used a big raise dead spell and animated, well, not raise dead, animate dead, create undead, and just had all these different zombies get up and start using their firearms, trenching tools, bayonets, anything that they had on hand, and started attacking these rangers that had overrun this German position and inflicted a ton of casualties just from the mass mayhem and confusion. And not only that, but even though they're using small unit tactics, not only were the Nazi German dead raised, but so were the dead Ranger units. So the enemy units were intermixed and interspersed throughout all of these units here, and this is where perhaps a large block unit of infantry would have been incredibly useful and possibly been more effective against these undead. But then again, maybe not, because they still had grenades, they still had rifles and machine guns and the like, so it just would have been interesting to see how it would have played out had the players tried to do things a bit tactically differently. But in that moment of panic, nobody grouped up. Everybody was down to that gory, brutal, life-ending mass melee brawl where there's no unit cohesion, there was no ability to band together and start maneuvering and flanking these units. To top it off, anytime officers started trying to take control and started to rally the troops beneath them, or anybody rallying their friends together to try to fight back the undead in a more coordinated and effective manner, German marksmen started picking off the officers, sowing more dissent and confusion and panic throughout this unit of Rangers. So it made for an absolutely interesting, challenging tactical situation for the players to think through, and God bless my players' hearts and their ability to roleplay. They actually brought that panic in pretty well. I definitely helped induce it in them because they felt like, yeah, they could die at any moment in this situation where they had previously just been absolutely victorious. But they also leaned into it and played it up, and it made for absolutely incredible role-playing for that first night of that particular campaign. But like I said, those are just little snippets, and these are just my thoughts and experiences regarding this kind of a situation, adapting these various tactics from different time periods into particular settings, whether it's modern tactics in fantasy settings or bringing in fantasy elements and little strategies into a more modern day setting. Doing these little things can help to make your war campaigns a fair bit more interesting. But let me know if you agree or if you have your own thoughts or experiences by commenting down below. And if you enjoyed today's video, maybe consider giving me a like down there. And hell, if you've been liking the content here so far, maybe even consider going ahead and clicking on the subscribe button there. And if you do subscribe, make sure you click the bell icon so that way you get notified the next time I upload more content here. With that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. You all have yourselves a good night.